Hi, and welcome to our conversation today with Brot and Coburn on Mount Everest, mountain tourism in the changing Himalayas. We'd like to thank the Center for Asian Studies here at CU for sponsoring Brot's visit, as well as the Departments of Anthropology, Geography, and International Affairs. Yesterday evening, Brot gave a slideshow here at CU on his recent publication, The Vast Unknown, chronicling the 1963 American expedition to Mount Everest. Today, we're tracing the trajectory of Mount Everest and the Khumbu from 1963 to today, 2013, and looking at the changes to lifestyles, landscape, and environment in the region. Brot Coburn is a resident of Wyoming and has lived in the Himalaya for 20 of the past 35 years. He's worked extensively in development and has written and overseen projects for the UN, the World Bank, the World Wildlife Fund, and the American Himalaya Foundation. Brot has written or edited over 6 publications, including 2 national bestsellers, and has been granted several literary awards. He's currently a visiting associate professor at Colorado College and returns to the Khumbu at least once a year. So I'm happy to welcome and introduce Brot here to CAS today. And we have 3 general themes to our discussion today. Mount Everest as a geographical place in the Khumbu in the central Nepal Himalayas. The role of mountain tourism in changing the profile of the Khumbu region, and more of the specific aspects of cultural, socioeconomic, and environmental change that's taken place in the Khumbu over the past 50 years. So, Brot, if you could first give us a little insight into the place of Mount Everest in the Khumbu, both historically and culturally, as well as the focal point of mountaineering and trekking tourism over the past 50 or 60 years.
Well, great to be here. Thank you, Galen. And beginning more than 60 years ago, when the Sherpas were subsistence transhumanists and agriculturalists, Mount Everest really was just one of several peaks around the area. The Sherpas didn't know it was the highest peak on the planet until the 1920s, really. But Everest was regarded as the abode of a specific deity, one of the so-called 5 long life sisters, Miolong Sangma. And along with peaks stretching from Gauri Shankar to the west of Everest and into the Everest cirque of mountains, these 5 long life sisters, who are believed to have preceded the Buddhist influence in the area and were recruited by the Buddhists to be Buddhist deities. Previous to that, these deities, Miolong Sangma for Everest in particular, basically acted as guardian deities and protective deities. Miolong Sangma is the goddess of inexhaustible giving and is depicted in wall paintings and tankas in the local area as a goddess riding atop a white tiger. Now, the Sherpas began to migrate out of Nepal, which was closed to the outside world until 1950. Before 1950, the Sherpas developed a tradition of migrating out to Darjeeling, India, where they would intersect with foreign mountain climbing expeditions that would come to Darjeeling to climb Mount Everest in particular by traveling directly up from India into Tibet, across part of Tibet, and then approach Mount Everest from the Tibet side of the mountain. And as a consequence of this unusual relationship between Sherpas and foreign climbers, and the great respect, really, that the foreign climbers had for the Sherpas in those early days, they realized they couldn't climb the mountains without the help of the Sherpas. They understood early on that the Sherpas have a unusual ability to perform and to carry loads at high elevations. Possibly, it's believed, due to a gene that they might share with Tibetans that gives them an increased ability to transport oxygen to their muscles. And so the Sherpas became known as the go-to ethnic group of people for these expeditions. Now, when Nepal opened in 1950 to expeditions, and finally foreign climbers could come into Nepal and approach the Himalaya from the south side within the boundaries of Nepal, then the new age, if you will, of the Sherpas really began. The first foreigners to ever enter Khumbu came into that valley in 1950, and actually it was a team of mostly Americans that was led by Oscar Houston, and he took with him his son, Dr. Charles Houston, who was one of the early American pioneering climbers. He was on the 1938 K2 expedition. And when Charles Houston entered Khumbu on the south side of Everest, he found people who, many of them didn't have shoes, or they wore crude boots made out of water buffalo hide, and they didn't have glass in their windows. They had heavy, clunky wooden shutters on their windows, and they didn't even have steel tips for their plows, for plowing their fields. So in a sense, it was a very traditional and I guess you might say a primitive sort of society at the time. Now, as these expeditions to Everest on the south side came through and began to climb the mountain, they paid for their services with money. And so as more and more expeditions came into the area, and as more and more Sherpas were recruited to climb other peaks across the Himalayan range, the Sherpas began to enjoy a certain amount of wealth and a certain amount of socioeconomic benefit from that, which is the point of our discussion today.
Great. Well, thank you for that insight into the history of the Khumbu region and the Sherpa communities. So Sherpa refers to both an ethnic group and an occupation in the Himalaya region. Could you please explain and differentiate for us who the Sherpa are ethnically, as well as what Sherpa means vocationally?
Sure. Sherpa, or Sharpa in Tibetan, means people from the east. And the Sherpa are one ethnic group out of about 24 ethnic groups, between 24 and 90 ethnic groups, depending on how you parse the ethnic groups, who reside in a geographic enclave specific to a single valley in the Himalaya. So the south side of the Himalayan range is dissected by valleys, and in the case of Nepal, there are at least 20 of these north-south valleys that terminate in the crest of the high Himalayan range. People with ethnic groups such as Tamang, Gurung, Rai, Limbu, Takali, Newar, and high valley groups, Loba, Neshangba, Nubriba, and so on, have they speak their own language. They tend to be endogamous. They marry within their own ethnic group. They have specific dress and customs and culture and traditions. They, for the past few centuries, they, in most cases, are Tibetan Buddhists. They practice a variation of Tibetan Buddhism that has been influenced in some cases by pre-Buddhist influences. What is interesting about the Sherpa in comparison to many of these other ethnic groups is that they're actually a very small ethnic group, divided into three geographic zones, running north to south. The Khumbu Sherpas, traditionally in 1963, let's say, numbered about 4,000 in population. To their immediate south, in the valley that leads up to Khumbu, is a region called Farak, and there are only a couple of thousand of Sherpas who live in that narrow area, and that connects to a larger area farther to the south known as Solu. And it's believed that approximately 30,000 Sherpas reside in Solu. And there's some interesting history there that has connected the Sherpas of Khumbu and Solu especially. In fact, traditionally, cross-marriage between these two ethnic groups was very common. And there reasons for that are interesting. During the Rana regime in the up until 1950, only ethnic groups from regions that bordered Tibet were allowed to trade with Tibet. In the case of the Sherpa, the trade with Tibet was very lucrative, and so for Solu families to be able to enjoy those trade privileges with Tibet, they found that they needed to marry in to Khumbu families, and so a tradition was developed really where brides were taken from Solu to Khumbu, and thereby the Solu people had access to trade. Now, the Sherpa, of course, even though they're a small ethnic group, have become known. We in the West recognize their name more than the others because of their connection to mountaineering and to an entire history now of Himalayan mountaineering that has touched many countries of the world. Now, the name Sherpa, or the title Sherpa, also is something of a generic title within the trekking and the mountaineering industry. And in order to be a Sherpa with a small s, usually is how it's spelled, one doesn't need to be even of the Sherpa ethnic group, but instead it's a level in the hierarchy on treks and climbs that begins with porter at the very bottom rung, those who just carry loads, and carry loads only at lower elevations, not across snow or high on the mountains. And then to the next level, I believe it's cook boy is the first one, or the next level, and they run errands. It's for many either being a porter or a cook boy is an entry level kind of a position. And then the next level is Sherpa, and they set up the tents and perform a slightly higher level of tasks and have slightly more responsibility on a trek or an expedition. And then you have mountaineering Sherpa or high altitude Sherpas, and those are the Sherpas who are more specialized because they have had experience climbing above an expedition's base camp high on the mountain. And then you have Sirdar, or foreman for the expedition. Those are those who are in charge. Even up until the present day, the Sirdars generally are of the Sherpa with a capital S ethnic group. The lower levels in that hierarchy increasingly have been also of other ethnic groups as well, but they're still predominantly Sherpa ethnic group. I hope that's not too complicated.
Well, thank you for that explanation and the distinction between large, big S Sherpa as the ethnic group and small S Sherpa as the occupation is very helpful. Now, as a result of the small S Sherpa occupation, the large S Sherpa ethnic group of the Khumbu has flourished economically and now has name recognition around the world. Could you explain to us how mountain tourism has significantly impacted both the lifestyles and the landscapes of the Khumbu region, particularly in light of your decades of work in the Khumbu region and in the context of your recent book, which takes a very close look at the Khumbu 50 years ago in 1963?
Well, the advent of mountaineering and tourism in Khumbu has been transformational, in socioeconomically speaking, in some regards culturally speaking, and also internationally, and we can talk about that. In 1963, when Big Jim Whittaker, they called him, and Nawangombu climbed Mount Everest, they were the fourth and fifth humans to climb Mount Everest. Since that time now, more than 4,000 people have climbed Everest in 6,000 ascents because of the multiple ascents. The number of visitors to Khumbu, to the Everest area now, for the past several years has averaged more than 30,000 per year. So understandably, that number of people have just had a tremendous impact on Khumbu and on the Sherpa as well. Some of the impacts arguably are beneficial, and some of them are problematic or even negative, and it may depend on how you choose to describe those impacts. Environmentally speaking, it's quite interesting. I was a consultant for UNESCO, helping advise Sagarmatha National Park, the national park that was gazetted by the Nepal government in 1977, that comprises the 1,100 square kilometer area of Khumbu, and was designated a year later as a World Heritage Site as well. I was a UNESCO advisor to them, helping the park try to figure out what they could do in terms of introducing sources of energy, alternate sources of energy that would help reduce the reliance on firewood for cooking, mainly the traditional source of fuel for cooking. In '63, with very, very few visitors to the area, it wasn't very much of a problem. By the year 2013, with again 30,000 people a year, the impact of those travelers has been tremendous. Trying to preserve the forests from being cut down, trying to reduce the impact from grazing and livestock, especially pack animals, yak crossbreeds, zopkyo, and also increasingly mules now that are in great demand by the mountaineering and trekking groups. to ferry their loads up through Khumbu, generally from the Lukla airstrip up to Everest Base Camp. And so there's great demand on the grazing resources of the area too. And as well, there has been a proliferation of trekking lodges, increasingly expansive lodges. In fact, just the past 2 or 3 years even, the discussion among Sherpas who are building trekking lodges is that they have identified a tremendous demand for attached bathrooms. And so almost no lodge now is constructed that does not have an attached bathroom to each private room. And as a consequence, because they're installing flush toilets in these attached bathrooms, they have developed significant human waste problems, sewage problems. The development of septic systems is not at all sophisticated, and Namche Bazaar in particular has developed quite a situation where the groundwater and the groundwater all around Namche Bazaar has been seriously polluted and infiltrated by coliform bacteria. In fact, there's a famous spring that flows out, a constant flow, fairly large volume spring that issues out right from the middle of Namche Bazaar, and is very likely the reason that Namche was settled in that horseshoe basin. And that spring water is now heavily polluted. So even in a place like Namche, there's been discussion about having centralized sewage, not septic systems, but actually collecting sewage from the lodges and having a sewage treatment plant. So now the Everest area is facing what you might even describe as urban sorts of issues. That's one example. Also, these lodges are being set up in very often random locations along trails, and the management, again, of the firewood, grazing, also medicinal plant collection resources of the area hasn't been managed in a rigorous manner, you might say. The national park is underfunded. Unfortunately, many of the staff who work for Sagarmatha National Park are not from the area. They're not Sherpa. They are down valley people. They come from much poorer families themselves. They don't have an ethnic connection to the area, and so they have very little inspiration to try to manage and enforce the regulations of the national park. One thing that I think is worth mentioning and is fairly interesting, and we could categorize this as a beneficial impact of the national park and a beneficial impact of the income that has come into the area, is that poaching of wildlife, important and sometimes charismatic wildlife, specifically snow leopard and musk deer, has actually declined in the past few years. Part of that is due to ramped up surveillance and enforcement by the national park. Perhaps more so it's a result of education and the Sherpas' recognition that wildlife is, and viewing wildlife is one of the reasons that many of the tourists come, and it's something that they appreciate and enjoy and respect and want to see more of, essentially. And so the beginning from a young age, Sherpa school children now, and the children of other ethnic groups, are learning about snow leopard and how rare and valuable they are. And so now as a generalization, if you ask Sherpas about snow leopard, they will say, "Oh, they are one of our treasures of this area." They'll describe them in some fashion like that. 50 years ago, they were more regarded as pests or as predators on their livestock. So this is an interesting issue to explore, and the wildlife-human interface in Khumbu is a great topic for exploration. Dr. Som Ale of University of Minnesota, who's been working with tiger expert Dave Smith, is one of the snow leopard researchers who's been going back and forth to Khumbu annually to look at the very slowly increasing numbers of snow leopard. It's believed there are 4 or 5 breeding pair of snow leopard in the area. 15 years ago, there were no snow leopard. At least none had been seen for a period of almost 20 years. So it appeared that they were extirpated from the area. And 15 years ago, a snow leopard was sighted for the first time. It may have come over one of the high passes from Tibet or from a neighboring valley. And so that's one encouraging sign. I should mention one thing because people ask about this a lot. In the context of the environment of this area is that what about all of the waste on Everest, the garbage on Everest? It's, I think, instructive to realize or identify what that garbage is, what's the nature of it, what's the quality of it, and what's the quantity of it as well, and what kinds of stresses is it placing on the environment. Well, oxygen bottles on the south col of Everest, which in a casual sense, when I talk to Americans, they say, "Oh, Everest has this tremendous problem with garbage, all those oxygen bottles lying around." Well, that a bunch of oxygen bottles lying around on the south col are, in terms of pollution, they're really pretty inert. They do not present an environmental problem. They are not a form of pollution as such. They, I think, can better be described as an aesthetic problem. And what's interesting is that it's only a Western aesthetic. Sherpas and traditional people generally don't regard litter or garbage, something that you would discard and leave on the ground, as a problem. In fact, in some areas, while living in villages in some of these Himalayan valleys, I've found that litter, a cigarette package or a biscuit package, is actually a form of status in a way, and that when someone is given a fancy or a modern package of cigarettes, they will even garnish their front yard with, say, a package. And when visitors come by, they'll see it, and they'll see that their friend is a consumer of an expensive Western product. So in a that's just an example of how something like that can be regarded in kind of a paradoxical or an ironic way. Now in Khumbu, clearly because of again the 30,000 people bringing all of their trappings and with all of their demand for resources, they are casting off a tremendous, in typical American fashion, they're casting off a lot of garbage and a lot of litter. And so the Sherpas have certainly gotten on board into cleaning that up. And and education in the schools has also reinforced the need. I think in terms of community pride and for aesthetic reasons, to pick up litter. And so I've been hiking with a lot of Sherpas who will step off the trail to pick up litter, and they'll put it in their pack to dispose of it later. So that's an interesting and beneficial cultural shift there. Meanwhile, I mention it because it's important to make that distinction between the aesthetic litter problem, as it's called, and what I would refer to as genuine environmental problems. Again, deforestation for firewood and overgrazing of livestock. Those two in particular are concerning, and increasingly at various campsites and nodes along the way in certain villages along the major trek route, again, human waste is becoming a serious problem. Now, in terms of what's being done to address that, in the case of alternate energy, there are now 8 or 9 micro hydroelectric plants operating throughout Khumbu, and one small hydro plant that's being refurbished at 650 kilowatts. Right now, it's under enhancement with help from the Indian government. There are also what are called back boiler water heaters that many, I believe most lodges have now, which are flat metal tanks that fit into the back of a traditional fire hearth that circulate water through the thermosiphon effect, similar to a passive solar water heater. They thermosiphon water from these back boiler heaters up to a tank that is near the stove, the traditional stove. And these have been very effective in producing hot water in an auxiliary kind of way.
Thanks, Brot, for sharing your perspective on the complex implications of development, mountain tourism, conservation efforts, and how this trekking and mountaineering economy has impacted and led to education and reforms and technological innovations in the Khumbu, yet at the same time has created huge stresses on water and natural resource capacity. One thing that's particularly interesting is the status of Sherpas within Nepal by virtue of their economic prosperity, and now a Sherpa diaspora in New York and in the UK and in elsewhere around the world. And could you give us some insight as to the position of the Sherpa in the labor economy in Nepal, in particularly how cash flow and the generation of capital in the Khumbu is moving in and out of the region in relationship to mountain tourism?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a complicated question. I would encourage scholars also to address any facet of this question, because, again, the Sherpas are undergoing this phenomenal socioeconomic transformation. You can look at it from the political point of view. If you take the more or less narrow confines of politics, traditionally, Sherpas were regarded as second-class citizens by the ruling Hindu monarchy up until 1990, really. Nepal had a constitutional monarchy between 1950 and 1990. And during that period especially, the Sherpa were a very low status. They were they were termed as botes, or people from the region, the remote, backward, primitive regions near the Tibet border. It's actually a term of disparagement, so they had no political footing in Nepal, very little political footing. As their economy grew, as their ethnic group economy grew. With money comes more influence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, overcoming cultural differences and this Hindu ruling elites, you would say, patronizing view toward the Buddhist minorities was a serious obstacle to overcome. But regionally in the administrative district of Solukhumbu, as the Nepal government has divided up the Nepal into these administrative districts, 76 districts in Nepal. The district of Solukhumbu, which has a majority Sherpa population, they did gain some traction, beginning mostly after 1950, and were able to gain some political influence, although only a tiny bit in a national sense. What I found interesting after this, and this is worthy of more study, is that in a sense, the great wealth that the Sherpas leapfrogged during those years of the buildup of the trekking and mountaineering industry, that wealth has allowed them to almost leapfrog over the bureaucracy and the political context of Nepal in many ways. The government, at least for the past 23 years, has in many ways been only semi-functional, almost dysfunctional, you might say. Although at the same time the economy has been functioning without a tremendous amount of hindrance. So the Sherpas, even in the absence of political clout, have been able to parlay their economic clout into a certain amount of advantage. And in one sense, the Sherpas regard the political context of Nepal, the country, as so dysfunctional that they would prefer to skip Nepal politics altogether and take their aspirations and their income elsewhere. And they've done that to India, Korea, Europe, and Canada, and even the United States, especially the United States. And so the Sherpa have been able actually to set up something of a diaspora community in the U.S. that is centered in the New York City area, specifically in Queens, because Queens has been a phenomenally successful, economically thriving region, which has been the destination point for many people immigrating from South Asia. What's really interesting and also is worthy of further study is that many of these Himalayan ethnic groups that we were talking about, who are specific to these geographic valleys of the Himalayas, that they many of them are coming to the United States now. There are daily arrivals, you might say, and that they are when they resettle in New York, they are moving into enclaves or regions of New York, regions of Queens in general, which reflect their geographic origin in Nepal. So in other words, the Loba, the Nubriba, Sherpa, and so on have a tendency to settle in proximity to their own ethnic group when they move to New York. And so they're recreating these communities. And it's very interesting how they, in a sense, re-express themselves once they come to the U.S. The Sherpas know they are Sherpas, and they want to recreate their traditions, their culture. They hope to enhance their language as well, or remember their language, if you want to put it that way. The uh, and and they do it in a slightly unusual way because they are in the context of America. One thing that all of these immigrants share, and the Sherpas certainly when they come to the U.S., is that they end up working often very long hours. So the Sherpas who come to the U.S., again, in a general sense, the early immigrants from Nepal generally have to start at an entry-level job, and the lowest entry-level jobs are generally working in a restaurant for the men and working as a nanny for the women. One anecdote that a Sherpa told me is he said, it's funny that in Nepal we were sandwiched between the two giants of China to the north and India to the south. And now we come to Queens, New York, and we end up working in either a Chinese restaurant or an Indian restaurant. And so we thought we were escaping from the influence of China and India, and here in Queens we're we're subject to their to our employers' desires, and they often find the Chinese and the Indians as employers to be very demanding of them, and the hours are long and the conditions are harsh. What's interesting, of course, is that I feel that the Sherpas have and again these other ethnic groups, they have the medium and the long-term goals. They have those goals in mind throughout, and so they're not just thinking about improving their own situation. In fact, you might say they're primarily thinking about improving the opportunities and possibilities for the next generation. And so they have become very aware of the value of education. And so they will live in what you might term squalor in community housing situations in order to save every bit of money they can, very often to dedicate it even to private school education. For their children, and so they take that very seriously, and they have been very resourceful at working hard, studying, becoming a part of the American dream, because for many South Asians, upwardly mobile South Asians, the American dream is their dream, really. And of course, we're a country that's built upon the resourcefulness and the strengths of immigrants as well. And so it's been very interesting for me to follow that transition. It ties into one issue that I've heard, if I could speak about this, that is related to mountaineering. One complaint, I guess you would call it, in the popular press, Outside Magazine, and other such venues, is that the Sherpas on mountaineering expeditions don't get the credit or the glory that Western climbers, that foreign climbers get, for instance, when they climb Mount Everest. In a simplified way, that's true, and perhaps they deserve more credit. But the picture there, the question there is much larger, I feel. One thing is that, especially in just the past few years, I can assure you that the Western climbers, the foreign climbers trudging up Mount Everest, are not returning to their homes in America to great throngs of glory. Climbing Everest is, for some Americans I've known, they've almost regarded it as slightly embarrassing, because mountaineers know that it's not truly a mountaineering challenge really anymore. And and that everybody else has done it. So it's nothing unique. You cannot build a career. You cannot build the foundation for a career in America by saying that you've climbed Mount Everest. Mm-hmm. And yet the Sherpas, frankly, I don't believe they care so much for the glory. They want the much more important element of all that, and that's the money. The money is a tool that they can use to better their lives, and they take that money and they invest it, and they invest it in trekking lodges and becoming partners in Sherpa-owned airline companies, and they're buying helicopters. They're just this past June in 2013, I was in Namche, and the Sherpas were building this their second private helicopter landing pad right above Namche for a Sherpa-owned helicopter. Now, I think it's also fair to say that glory on Everest is only at best, it would be a stepping stone to much higher ambitions. Being famous for climbing Mount Everest is not a very lofty goal for a Sherpa. Sherpas want to be airline pilots, they want to be doctors, lawyers, real estate professionals, they want to move to America, and they want their children to have those opportunities. Mountain climbing is for recreationalists, really. It's nothing to take seriously in the big picture. There are a few exceptions to that. There are Sherpas who have successfully forged respectable careers out of mountaineering, but I would say only a handful. You have Appa Sherpa, who's climbed Everest 21 times. He has brought his family to the U.S. He lives in the Salt Lake City area, and he has done public speaking and has become something of a public figure, at least in the Rocky Mountains, as well as in Nepal. And so he's been able to parlay that into income for his family. But even in Appa's case, too, if I may speak for him, his long-term goal is education for his kids. So as Tenzing Norgay said to Jumling, his eldest son, who I collaborated with on his book, Touching My Father's Soul, as Tenzing Norgay said to Jumling, I climbed Everest so that you wouldn't have to. And I think that's a key point, is that the Sherpas climb Everest so that they don't have to again as well. There are lots of stories of Everest Sherpa high altitude mountaineers who come down to base camp for refueling and for carrying loads and so on, and their wives show up at base camp and beg them to not climb, beg them to come off the mountain. Mm-hmm. So they all want to stop climbing as soon as they have enough of a financial leverage point or enough of a financial advantage to be able to stop doing it. So mountain climbing, it's similar to what the Nepali migrant laborers in the Middle East call 3D work: difficult, dirty, and dangerous. And it's something they want to do for a limited amount of time, make money, and get out of.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing a unique perspective on mountaineering economy in the Sherpa community, and particularly your anecdote from Jomling Tenzing Norgay, what his father said to him, and the real intention and motivation behind becoming a Sherpa as a mountain guide in order to further the opportunities for your children and family. Now, we've had a rich discussion, Brot, and you have a wealth of insight, experience, and knowledge about Khumbu and the Sherpa community and development and conservation in the Himalaya more broadly. In recent years, you've been teaching courses at Colorado College and taking Colorado College students to the Khumbu every spring and summer. And for other educators here in Colorado, what recommendations, resources, and opportunities can you suggest that could be brought into an American classroom to educate secondary school students about these complex transformations, unique histories, and implications of modernity that is occurring in the Khumbu today?
Well, there are innumerable PhD theses, master's theses, popular books, scholarly books that have been written about Khumbu and the Sherpas. And a few of them have touched on socioeconomic change and the issues that the area and the Sherpas are facing today. Things are changing so quickly there that much of the scholarship that's been done in the area, if it has any kind of temporal aspect to it, quickly goes out of date. It's a very dynamic situation there. And so I would start off by saying that anyone who is serious about exploring these issues should jump into it and take a look at these issues, because they may come up with some original and some new and some timely and perhaps very even useful information. In terms of what you can refer to now, again, library research is always good, and asking questions. Find Sherpas if you're interested in Sherpas. Better than speaking with me, perhaps, is grab some Sherpas and ask them what they feel about various issues. And as I was talking with you and with Kunga Lama, thank you again, Kumba, for sponsoring this, is that the Sherpas are complex, dynamic. They have many different opinions, different views. And so through the process of individual inquiry, I think you can get an idea of the range of personal opinions and a range of an idea of the great variety and range of the issues that are involved. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Brot. And whether it's a trip to Sherpa's restaurant here in Boulder or an adventure to the Khumbu itself, we hope to see you again here and continue our conversations.
Oh, yeah, you bet. Sure.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.